All right, welcome up to the second college football. I am David Nuño. Lots of storylines to get into. We've got a big matchup with Clemson and Georgia, Alabama, Miami, and quarterbacks all over the land. And we go to Athlon Sports. Bryan Fischer joining us here on the show. Bryan, thanks so much for joining us, my friend.
Great to be on with you.
Hey, so let's start things off with quarterbacks out there. There's a lot of names you could throw out there, but who do you see as the best college football quarterback entering this season?
I think it's really kind of wide open. I know everybody's going to talk about, Sam Howell at UNC or Spencer Rattler at Oklahoma, but I think it really is kind of everybody out there can contend for it. I mean, you look at DJ Uiagalelei at Clemson. He's another guy that I think could have some Heisman type potential, and I think there's no one kind of returning starter that everybody's kind of fawning over, and that includes the NFL scouts. I think that everybody's really looking forward to what kind of season a lot of these quarterbacks can come. So I think it is a pretty wide open race in terms of who might be that top guy.
Bryan, are you high on Oklahoma? This being the last year potentially. We'll see what happens in the future in the Big 12. Can they get it done this year?
I think so. I think, this is a team that has been building towards this moment. And I think, Lincoln Riley, with what he's been able to recruit on the defensive side of the ball, this is going to be really a top 20 defense. And that's always been the question mark about the Sooners these last couple of years is, can they have that defense to match? And I think they finally do, especially up front. The defensive line looks a lot closer to those old Oklahoma teams that we were used to seeing, in terms of the bodies up front. They're really excited about the rotation as well, with the number of guys they can kind of throw out there and the depth that they have. Really not something that they've had these last couple of years. I think, Alex Grinch, the DC, is really excited about his crew there. And so you throw that with an offense that we know with Lincoln Riley can put up points, Heisman Trophy guy and Spencer Rattler. I think Oklahoma, definitely not only the class of the Big 12 this year, but certainly looking higher at those college football playoff aspirations.
All right, let's talk a little bit about Miami taking on Alabama. Do you think D'Eriq King can make enough plays to make this game interesting? And does he have to be the best player on the field for them to have a chance to beat them?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the $1 million question, right? What kind of health and status is he is? I mean, we've seen guys recover from injuries like that in the past, but let's face it, it's just a lot on his shoulders. And does Miami have some game-breaking guys that can have those abilities to score touchdowns from all over the field? Sure, but especially in the trenches, how are they going to combat this Alabama defense? Which, let's face it, I think everybody kind of got a mixed message from them last year, especially after that Ole Miss game. This is a very, very good unit. I think you look at that front seven; they've got bodies for days. They've got starters. You plug in guys like Henry Toto. This is going to be difficult to move the ball against the Crimson Tide. So Miami, with the way they can move that tempo and have a quarterback like that can escape pressure, it's a tall task. But certainly D'Eriq King has that opportunity this weekend to make a big game out of it and possibly pull in the upset.
All right, let's talk a little Clemson-Georgia, because some people believe this game really doesn't have college football playoff implications. Do you see it having it? Because Clemson's got a pretty easy road down the way, and Georgia still has plenty of room to make up if they were to fall in the SEC.
Yeah, I think in the college football playoff picture, it really doesn't mean a ton. I mean, you look at Clemson, I think it does hurt them maybe more if they are to take a loss, just because the ACC reputation is not where, you could have, an equal, especially if there's some chaos elsewhere, to where you have an Oklahoma that goes undefeated out there. If you have, obviously, the SEC champion, maybe even the SEC East champion, if Georgia runs the table, the rest of the way. So I think it's a more difficult path for them to kind of come back from a loss. But, the schedule sets up nicely for them. I think this is really a big measuring stick test game for both offenses, in terms of what are we going to see this year, not just out of their quarterbacks, but out of their wide receivers, their running backs, the offensive linemen that they're replacing. I think it's going to be a big, certainly a big game for everybody. Everybody's hyped for this top 5 matchup, two regional rivals. But at the end of the day, I think everybody wants to see what is the level and caliber of these teams. And we'll be able to see that certainly early on in that game in Charlotte.
All right, so turning our attention to the University of Texas, I think they got a pretty tough start to the season against teams that they should beat, but tougher teams out there. Arkansas week 2, obviously Louisiana week 1. How do you see this playing out these first couple of weeks for Texas?
Well, it's certainly going to be interesting. I mean, I think Steve Sarkisian, with the quarterback announcement that they've had, they're excited to go with their guys. And I think Bijan Robinson, I mean, they better be giving that guy the rock, 20 or 30 times a game. I mean, he is not only going to be the focal point of that offense, but this is going to be an interesting crew in terms of the wide receivers mix that they've got. I think they're still a little bit questionable along the offensive line. They've got some good pieces there, but are they going to be able to hold up for all those games? But they've got a big test, against a Louisiana team that not only has a ton coming back, but they're excited to play a team like Texas. They know that they're ranked in the top 25 as well. This is going to be huge for Billy Napier's program. So they might have a few things saved up. I'm sure Sark and that staff are preparing for that, but it's going to be a very interesting chess match. And like you mentioned, it's a tough non-conference schedule for Texas, and they basically don't kind of get really much of a break until they play Kansas this year.
All right, turning our attention to the Pac-12. Can Oregon be a team that gets somehow into that Final Four playoff spot?
I think so. And a lot of it's going to come down to just how do they look against Ohio State in that week 2 matchup. I think everybody's excited about the talent level that Mario Cristobal has had there in Eugene. He's recruited tremendously well, especially in the trenches, which has normally been a problem for a lot of those Pac-12 teams. The offensive and defensive lines look like they're a major college football playoff contender. And, I think that's been his biggest transformation there. It does come down to quarterback. And Anthony Brown, I think he's got a high floor. I just don't know if the ceiling is there to truly take this team to the next step and beat a team like Ohio State. But if they can look good, kind of evolve throughout the rest of the year, certainly the Pac-12 schedule sets up nicely for them to where, they can get right back into the thick of the national chase. And, they're going to have some help elsewhere, especially if they do lose that game to the Buckeyes. They'll need some upset of Oklahoma or Clemson taking a second loss or something like that to kind of get into the playoff mix. But this is a very good team that I think Mario Cristobal has, and I'm excited to kind of see how they evolve throughout the year.
Brian, are you at all intrigued by LSU and UCLA, two teams that I really don't know where to put them just because I know LSU can be good. UCLA put up, 44 on Hawaii. I don't know where to put these teams. Can you help me out there?
Yeah, I think UCLA is a team that can contend for the Pac-12 South, which I think maybe speaks a little bit more just how wide open that division is overall. But this is what Chip Kelly and his staff has kind of been building for. You look through up and down there too deep. It's not just the continued evolution of guys like Dorian Thompson-Robinson or bringing in guys like Zach Charbonnet at running back. They've really built the entire offense and defense around veterans in that system that know what they do by now. And you saw flashes of it, even though they were playing pretty vanilla against Hawaii. I think you saw the flashes of UCLA kind of turning the corner under Chip Kelly. They've got a tall task though against LSU. Now you never know with LSU going on the road to Houston this week, and everybody kind of think about what's going on there. Certainly back home in the state of Louisiana, how much that might weigh on them early on. But I know Ed Orgeron, and he's confident in this team turning it around. I think the upside with Max Johnson, is there. He's not only capable of making all the throws, but I think he's excited to kind of take on this task in the Rose Bowl. And the Tigers, they are going to be really overmatching the Bruins there in the trenches. I think that's where they can really win is up front. And they've got guys on the outside. Keyshawn Boot, he's going to be one of the names mentioned in terms of the Biletnikoff Award. So they've got some guys, and I know Ed Orgeron, nothing more than for the former USC coach to go into the Rose Bowl, get a big win against UCLA. I would imagine they're going to be fired up for this opportunity this weekend.
Brian, so this show originates from College Station. Lots of expectations. I'm an Aggie as well for what Texas A&M can do and what Jimbo is putting together here at Texas A&M. Your thoughts as they enter this season? They got Kent State this weekend, and then they've got Colorado and New Mexico before things get real. But how do you see the Aggies finishing out this year?
I think in terms of everybody looking at the SEC, if this is going to be the year to kind of knock off Alabama, certainly whether you mention Georgia, whether you mention Texas A&M, it's really the opportunity in front of them. And I think Jimbo Fisher and that staff understand, this they've been building towards this moment. Yeah, there are questions about, whether Haynes King and how he's going to handle being, QB1, but they wouldn't have chosen him and chosen him this early in the process if they weren't confident in his abilities. And he does, let's face it, kind of add a bit of a different element to that offense. I'm very curious to see how much they are going to kind of run him and use that dual threat ability. But he's got a tremendous set of skill position talent around him. And I know there are questions along the offensive line. I think that might be probably the biggest question mark left for this team outside of the quarterback position. But they've been stacking those top 5 classes after top 5 classes. And the depth, honestly, is as good as I've seen in probably a couple decades, there in College Station. So This is a team that has been building for these type of moments to where you got Alabama coming into Kyle Field. This is a big time season for the program after making that big leap last year and going 9-1, finishing in the top 4 of the polls. Now it's time to take advantage of it and really win the SEC West and move on from there.
Are you at all intrigued by Notre Dame, Florida State on Sunday night?
A little bit. Certainly the Florida State quarterback competition there, and seeing whether Mackenzie Milton can go out there and take a few snaps just from a storyline perspective is going to be good for the Noles. But they brought in a lot of transfers as well, and I think everybody looks at this Notre Dame team and says, all right, yeah, they lost a lot of guys. They lost Ian Book to the NFL. Certainly, there's still a huge amount of talent there in South Bend. Marcus Freeman, the defensive coordinator hire, was a great offseason find for Brian Kelly. So I think everybody's excited to see that defense. And this is honestly still a team that, although they don't have that ACC schedule and maybe that easy end to the playoff, I think everybody sees the floor for this group to be, kind of the 9-3, 10-2 team that we all kind of expect from Notre Dame on a regular basis. Can they get into that playoff mix? I think we're going to start to see that early on, and it probably does start with this weekend's game.
Brian, one of your tweets caught my attention about Sam Noyer. Can you tell our audience a little bit about his story? What was he, a safety at Colorado, and now he's quarterback at Oregon State? Yeah,
I mean, it's just kind of a wild story that you can only get in college football. But somebody that was playing safety at CU. He's from the Oregon area, from Beaverton actually. So this Oregon State his return, I guess you could say, a bit of a homecoming for him. And to be able to start this weekend, it's kind of just a wild journey. Last year, the new staff coming in really didn't know what to expect. They moved him back from safety to quarterback and said, you know what, we've got to find guys. And he ended up winning the job there at CU. Had a terrific season. Second team all Pac-12, nearly led the Buffs to a division title. And then, just off-season changes, decides to go home and now beats out Tristan Gebbia and a few others there for that OSU job. So tremendous journey for him. And it's going to be interesting to see because you look at that Oregon State team, another program that's kind of fighting to get back to 6 wins, and he brings a ton of veteran experience.
Bryan Fischer, Athlon Sports. Thanks so much for joining us, my friend. We'll do it again.
Absolutely, anytime.
All right, welcome back to the Up to the Second College Football Show. We got the big game spotlight going on right now. Clemson and Georgia. We're joined by Lawton Swann of Clemson Sports Talk to break down the Clemson Tigers. And then on the Georgia side, Radi Nabulsi, UGA insider for WXIA. Guys, thanks so much for joining us here on the program, getting ready for a big-time game this weekend.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
All right, Lawton, let's start off with you. Another big game for Dabo and company. This is what they do. They start off the season so many times in the past with a big-time game. Just more par for the course. Your thoughts on heading into this big game against Georgia?
Yeah, I think it's always unique to kick off your season with one of these neutral site ball games, and certainly a matchup of 2 top 5 teams is something that Clemson's kind of become accustomed to. But to jump out of the gates into one of these games with a new quarterback and the situation at running back, trying to replace Travis Etienne. For the first time in a long time, there really are some substantial question marks, I think, for Clemson offensively, and that'll probably be the tale that tells the story in this ball game. Who turns it over? And that's kind of where my head is right now. If Clemson manages to protect the football, I think they'll have a good shot at winning this ball game for sure.
Radi, from a Georgia perspective, a lot of injuries out there. How will that affect this game here on Saturday?
Well, a few weeks ago, everyone was thinking about having maybe Arik Gilbert on one side as a tight end and Darnell Washington, the 6'7", 260-pound behemoth on the other side at tight end. And everyone's kind of forgetting about John Fitzpatrick, the starter at tight end, and Brock Bowers, the true freshman that everybody's all geeked up about. But you're without George Pickens, a 5-star wide receiver. You're without Arik Gilbert, a 5-star tight end, and Washington, another 5-star. A lot of 5-star guys out for this game, so they're banged up pretty badly. And that it becomes a huge question mark. Where does Georgia look when it comes to their 12 personnel? What do they do with the wide receivers? Everyone talked about JT Daniels, but this is a guy who may not have all the tools in his receiver room that he would like to have. And also he faced 4 pretty, I don't say mediocre because that's rude, but he didn't face Georgia's toughest opponents last year when he came in at the end of the season for those last 4 games. So this is a real test. Nobody really knows what they have in JT Daniels. They suspect things, but they don't know. And this going up against this Clemson defense will teach us a lot.
Gentlemen, this is for both of you. We'll start with Lawton. Just how How big is this game? Because a lot of the pundits out there are saying it won't really paint the picture for the college football playoffs because so much season ahead. For Clemson, Lawton, we'll start off with you. How big is this one?
I think it's fairly substantial, but I think some of what they've done in the past will absolutely help them. And we heard from DJ Uiagalelei yesterday, and DJ said, look, Dabo Swinney has mentioned the fact that, this could be a team that you get to see a second time this year, just given what Georgia's got a chance to do over in the SEC. I think more so for Clemson than maybe Georgia. This is a key game because the Atlantic Coast Conference for a lot of people isn't going to deliver these showcase victories that you might need along the way. But if Georgia were to get beat by Clemson and then, of course, defeat Alabama, say, in the SEC championship at the end of the year, that probably offsets it a little bit. Plus, for Clemson's standpoint, if you get into a conversation of Georgia's only loss maybe coming in an SEC championship game, but yet they beat the champions of the ACC in the opener, that would tend to lead into a conversation where people might say, hey, the Dogs deserve the right to be in the college football playoff this year over Clemson because they beat them heads up on the field. So, it's one of those things. I don't think we truly know how it'll all play out, but I would say for Clemson, winning this game is certainly key because you don't get a lot to build up your resume, so to speak.
Radi, if you can give me the Georgia perspective.
He's absolutely right because that's the way Coach Smart, JT Daniels both yesterday said, look, this game is not make or break for Georgia's season. You still have, 8 conference games after that. Daniel said, look, you win by 100, but if you lose the SEC championship game or you lose some SEC games, it doesn't matter. If you lose this game by 100, but you win the SEC championship game, then you're going to be able to plant your flag and say, look, we deserve to be in the playoffs. So it's not the make or break for it, but I still think a lot of people look at this game and say, Kirby, you made it to the title game a few years ago, but you haven't been back since. So let's see what you can do when you have, 3 number 1 recruiting classes. You have a quarterback that's, last year the quarterback was unsettled, but you have one now. Let's see what you can do at a neutral site versus a perennial top 5 team. I think they're 88-9 or 88-7 over the last few years. So Clemson is a powerhouse, and Georgia and Clemson are traditional rivals. They're right up the street. They're maybe an hour and a half apart from each other. You go head to head on the recruiting trail all the time. A lot of recruits are going to be in attendance at that game. I think both sides have like 200 tickets that they can give out to recruits. This is it's not a game for the standings so much as it is a game for the hearts and minds of recruits and college football, the playoff committee in particular, and the pundits and fans. Win this one, it helps Georgia. Lose it, and now you can't make a mistake for the rest of the season.
Radi, we'll keep it with you. I know you touched on JT Daniels, but why is there so much optimism with his game there in Athens?
See, I'm not as optimistic as a lot of people are. It's nothing against him. It's just I think from where Georgia was last year, they had Jamie Newman come in as the transfer from Wake Forest. And then a couple of weeks before the season, he decides to opt out of the season. So now Georgia's scrambling. They go to DeJuan Mathis, who gets in that first game against Arkansas, and he can't get it done. They bring in Stetson Bennett, who was told before the season started that he was not going to get any meaningful playing time. They were basically up front with him and said, look, we don't see you playing here, buddy. And he goes on and plays for 5 games. Then against Florida, Georgia couldn't complete a pass, even though they had wide open receivers all over the place. They lose to Florida with neither DeJuan Mathis or Stetson Bennett able to complete a pass to a wide open receiver. It drove them nuts. So then JT Daniels comes in, wins the last 3 games of the regular season, wins the Peach Bowl. And everyone's like, okay, well, he's a Heisman guy. Like, wait a minute. Or maybe you're just a little punch drunk because of how bad it was. You have that USC quarterback in there that you're all excited about. Here's the thing, though. When you talk to people who have coached him, people who are around him, they talk about how smart he is, how the football IQ he has. He's not exactly the most mobile guy, and the backside pursuit is going to be an issue there because you don't have to worry about him running it. But he knows where to go with the ball. So that and the ability, he does have a big arm. That's why Georgia fans should be excited. But again, there are still questions about JT Daniels' mobility, questions about what it will be like facing a secondary as experienced as Clemson's.
All right, Lawton, what about DJ? I mean, we've seen glimpses. Why is everyone excited there with him?
Well, I think you just look at the arm strength that he's got, and that may be the toughest thing for him to still overcome is taking a little bit off of some of those balls across the middle. But I think there's a quiet confidence in Tiger Town from what you saw against Notre Dame last season, even in an environment that wasn't packed. And DJ said yesterday he's excited about being able to play in a packed stadium for the first time in his college career. But there's a poise, there's just sort of the way he carries himself that makes you feel really good about it. And, flashing back, and not to, harp on the Georgia conversation that Radi was having there, but that's one of the things I said about JT Daniels. It's 4 games, and that's the thing DJ's kind of dealing with too. It's just a couple of opportunities where we saw him. And so both guys are still, in my opinion, very much unknowns, especially in games of this magnitude. I think we know a little bit more about DJ, just given the fact that Notre Dame ended up being a college football playoff team. He led the drive that gave Clemson a chance to win it in the waning moments up in South Bend. It was really Clemson's defense, if you go back, that let them down in that scenario, and has in a couple of big games as of late. That'll be on display too this Saturday in that matchup for sure.
All right, 30 seconds each on this, Lawton. What's the key to the victory for Clemson?
I think the turnover margin, not turning it over, and really trying to figure out how to control the line of scrimmage defensively. Clemson's offensive line is a bit of a question mark right now, but I think all in all, you look at Tony Elliott as a play caller, he's done a really good job. A lot of people forget Tony Elliott was out with COVID last year during Clemson's matchup with Ohio State, and that's key to be out without your offensive coordinator. So I would say turnovers.
Radi?
Give me the quarterback center exchange. You're breaking in a new quarterback in Cedric Van Pran, or even Warren Erickson if he gets the cast off his wrist. If he comes back out there, that's going to be big. And then Georgia's safety play. You got to have this. You're kind of thin at safety. You got talented cornerbacks. You have a great front seven, but those Clemson wide receivers, they are big, tall, fast. There are going to be a lot of deep balls, a lot of 50-50 balls. And can those safeties break up those passes?
Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Have a fun time at the game this weekend. All right, welcome back to Up to the Second College Football. It's now for the big storylines. We got a big one with Alabama and Miami. A couple quarterbacks going to be showing down in that one. We'll start things off with Gary Ferman of canesport.com for a Miami perspective. Gary, how you doing, my friend?
Doing good. A lot of excitement down here for this game.
All right, so I'm trying to think things through. Nick Saban is at 15-1 in the Georgia Dome. That seems pretty good to me. And Bama has not lost a season opener since 2001. Why can Miami make this a victory for the Canes?
Well, they're going to have a lot go right, let's be honest. But, when I look at Alabama's defense, and I know it's considered, the best in college football, and a lot of people are saying that it's a national championship defense, and it might prove to be. But when I look at some of their games from last year against Ole Miss, against Florida, teams that were able to do some of the types of things that Miami is able to do on offense, were able to give Alabama some problems. And so the perfect storm for Miami would be for DR King to come out, have a phenomenal day, a career day, for them to hit some big plays and get some points on the board in that way. And then for Miami's defense to be able to just disrupt Bryce Young and create some issues on that side of the ball for a young quarterback that's never done it before on this stage. And I think that's the Miami game plan. I think they're going to go after him. I think they're going to blitz an enormous amount. I think they're going to try to speed up his brain a little bit and get him thinking quicker than what he's used to and what he became accustomed to on the practice field. And I think they're hoping that if they can do that, that they can force him into some mistakes.
Gary, I've known DR King a long time, since his days at Manville High School at the University of Houston. Coming back from an injury, he is a veteran without a doubt. How has he looked leading up to this one?
Well, stunning, to be honest with you. He had ACL surgery and came back in like 7 months. It used to take a year to come back from an injury like that. And really, he came out from the first day of fall camp and looked like he had never been injured before. In fact, the first chance he had to scramble and make a cut on that right knee, he did it. And everybody was just kind of like sitting there like awestruck, like, shocked to see him doing that on the first day of camp. But I think he was sending a message. I think he was sending a message to his teammates, like, I'm back, let's go. I'm your leader and I'm going to take you someplace. And I think he was sending a message to the coaches as well. Like, I'm the same guy, you don't have to protect me.
Does he have to be the best player on the field to beat Alabama, in your opinion?
No doubt. No doubt he has to be the best player on the field. This is a kid that some people think, if he were just a little bit bigger or whatever, would have like Heisman Trophy-esque ability. He's that kind of leader. He can impact the game in that way. And yeah, this has to be the game of his life, the best football game he's ever played. But if he's ever going to put up a game like that, this would be it. He's an experienced kid. He's in the second year with Rhett Lashley in this offensive system. He understands what to do. He's got a quality stable of playmakers around him. I mean, Miami's pretty decent at running back, tight end, and wide receiver. So if they can dial it up in just the right way and find a weakness or two in the Alabama defense that they can exploit, maybe they can stay in the game going into the fourth quarter if some other things bounce their way on the other side.
All right, so on the other side of the equation, you've got Alabama with an inexperienced quarterback, a guy who comes highly touted. There's no doubt about that. How does Miami confuse him, make life hard on Bryce Young?
Just like I said, just pressure, pressure, pressure. And that's what Manny Diaz defense is. I mean, you guys probably remember it from his days at Texas. I mean, this is a guy that wakes up blitzing, and he's going to stunt up front. He's going to bring linebackers. He's going to bring safeties. He'll bring corners. He's going to do everything that he can do to confuse Bryce Young and make him panic at times in that game and hopefully force him into mistakes.
Gary, last thing for you. Regardless of what happens against Alabama, how does the rest of the season play out for the Canes?
It could be very favorable. The schedule certainly is friendly. And, I don't think that there's, other than Clemson, that there's a great team in the ACC, at least not on the surface. I mean, obviously North Carolina is going to show up very good. That'll be a tough game for Miami. I think NC State has the capability of blossoming into a decent football team. Virginia Tech is always dangerous, Virginia. But there's nobody on there that you're saying, oh, my God, other than Alabama. And I think Miami could be favored in every other ball game. So it's right there in front of them. It's up to them to not have the season blow up on them the way they have in past years. And if they're able to do that, I think you'll see them in Charlotte playing Clemson for the ACC title.
All right, Gary Ferman, canesport.com. Gary, thanks so much, my friend. Take care.
All right, David, anytime.
All right, now we turn our attention to LSU versus UCLA. We're joined by Matt Moscona. You can catch him on Baton Rouge on ESPN out there. After further review, Matt, got to ask you, how are things there in Baton Rouge? I know it's been a crazy few days out there.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Baton Rouge, thankfully, was spared the worst of Ida. On Sunday, the storm kind of jogged about 10 miles to the east. And so, it's kind of crazy how you all know this, but if you're, 5-10 miles can make a massive difference with a storm like this. So much of Baton Rouge was left without power. Of course, it forced LSU to evacuate, but not good, but certainly could have been worse.
Well, Matt, how do you think this affects the players, just family all around the state, obviously, having to relocate to NRG Stadium and get ready to go to a Pac-12 showdown with UCLA?
Yeah, obviously it's not ideal. You'd much rather be in the comforts of your own bed and your routine at your facility. I guess if you're going to put the positive spin on it, there's a couple of things. Number one, if you live here, this is part of it. And so it's not anything new for the players and families of players who are coaches who are from here. The other thing, too, is being in Houston was the right decision. They could basically treat this like a bowl trip, whereas if they had stayed, they'd be dealing with power outages at football facility and dorm rooms. Is there generator power? Communication, cell service was down for 24 hours here. They were basically able to keep players fed and practice in an NFL stadium, basically treat it like a bowl trip. So it's not ideal, but leaving and going to Houston was the right decision. It allowed them to stay in a much more familiar process than they would have been had they stayed in Baton Rouge.
Matt, is it fair to say last year was a colossal disaster for what LSU expected? And if so, why should things be different this year?
It's completely fair. To put this into perspective, LSU defensively allowed 35 points a game last year. In 130 years of playing football, that is the worst defense statistically in the history of the program. So, yes, last year was a colossal failure to go 5-5, to have the worst defense ever, to have to fire half of your staff. Why this year might be different? It would be hard to be worse than the worst defense ever. LSU still has a ton of talent, and they did get a lot of buy-in from veterans, those super seniors and guys who returned for a 6th year. So LSU returns 20 starters and a lot of guys who are motivated to make amends from last year's disaster. But this is still a talented football team. I don't know if they're a championship contender, but this should be a team that is capable of winning every game on its schedule except one.
All right, Matt, how has Max Johnson looked out there at quarterback?
Yeah, he's poised. He's the son of a Super Bowl winning quarterback. And, whenever you talk to people around the program, they look at Max Johnson, they say, yep, that's how it's supposed to look. I mean, technically, he is as sound as you will find. And I think there is a great benefit when you talk about players who grew up around NFL locker rooms. The full stadium and the moment just isn't too big. It's familiar to them. And we saw that last year with Max as a freshman. He went on the road in his first start and beat Florida in the Swamp, and then beat Ole Miss in a duel where LSU won that one 52-48. So I don't think Max Johnson's going to be phased. I don't think LSU's offense is going to be a problem. They scored 32 a game last year. This season really is about getting that defense right. But I think Max Johnson's going to be just fine and might have won this job over Miles Brennan anyway.
All right, so let's get back to that defense. So UCLA last week puts up 44 on Hawaii. Not a huge opponent, obviously, but they were able to run the ball. Do they pose a threat, you think, to LSU?
Oh, that is the matchup to watch. The good-on-good matchup is that UCLA rush offense against the LSU defensive front seven. If you ask Ed Orgeron or anyone around this program, they will tell you that the unquestioned strength of this LSU team is that defensive line. They may rotate 10 or 11 players across that defensive front. So if UCLA is able to find rushing lanes and run the ball against LSU, it's going to be a long day for the Tigers. But if LSU can make UCLA one-dimensional and make Dorian Thompson-Robinson beat them through the air, that's major advantage LSU in the ball game. But that's the game within the game. The good on good is when UCLA is running the football against that LSU defensive front. That matchup will tell the story.
All right, let's talk about the coaches here because both are under the spotlight. Obviously, Ed O, even a couple years removed from that national championship, and Chip Kelly. Things have not looked good for him, a good start for him, but both coaches under that spotlight.
Yeah, Chip Kelly's interesting. Had such an incredible run at Oregon where he really redefined college football with his blur offense. Didn't have great success in the NFL. I think most assumed he would have had more success at UCLA than he's had. Interesting because a year ago, while they were just 3-4, they lost those 4 games by a combined 15 points. They returned 20 starters. They are a veteran. They look good. Yes, it was Hawaii, but UCLA certainly looked like a team at the line of scrimmage that was ready to compete, maybe compete for that Pac-12 championship. Ed Orgeron, a lot of people have asked David if Orgeron is on the hot seat this year. And I mean, simply put, the answer is yes. 5-5 season is never going to be acceptable here. You pile on top of that Title IX allegations, which are ugly if people read through the Hush Blackwell report. And then also an athletic director that didn't hire him. And I think we know every athletic director wants to make their stamp and their legacy on a program, and that's hiring a football coach. So, another subpar season. What I've said, David, is like 9-3 and no more movement in that Title IX investigation. I think Orgeron's okay. 8-4 gets a little dicey. 7-5, I think LSU's hiring a new football coach.
Wow. All right, Matt, last thing for you. What is the way for LSU to lose this game? What's the way for them to win this game?
The way for them to win is what we talked about a bit ago, which is going to be stop the run. If LSU's defensive front is able to stop the run and make UCLA one-dimensional, I don't know that Dorian Thompson-Robinson can pass UCLA through this LSU defense. If LSU loses, it's going to be because they can't stop the run. And the other big storyline to watch, the biggest question mark on this LSU team is its offensive line and its running game. They still have not established a starter at running back, and they're going to be much more formidable opponents at Texas A&M, Alabama, with great defensive lines that LSU is going to see in the SEC. UCLA's front seven was really physical and active and aggressive in that game against Hawaii. And if this LSU offensive line can't keep Max Johnson upright and can't establish a run, it could be a long day for the offense as well. It's so cliche to say you got to win the trenches, but this is one of those games where that is the game. It is strength on strength and strength on weakness, and whoever wins at the line of scrimmage in this game is going to win. It's why the spread is only a field goal. It's because LSU has those questions at the line of scrimmage.
Stay safe, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us, Matt. Appreciate you.
My pleasure.
All right, we're going to close out our big storylines with Texas and Louisiana. We go to orangebloods.com. Anwar Richardson joining the show. Anwar, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. Great to be on the show, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, man, so the Ragin Cajuns, they're I think, a difficult opponent for Texas to start the season off with. How difficult do you see this one, knowing what their history was last year, beating Iowa State, and obviously Texas struggling a bit last year?
Well, I mean, I don't think Texas could take anything for granted, going into this game. And it's hard for me to ignore a lot of the elephants in the room, right? You've got a brand new quarterback who's going to be making his first start in Hudson Card. You have new members of the offensive line. You have a receiving core that is still a little bit unproven. There's not a returning receiver on this team that had more than 500 yards receiving last season. Then you've got a new offensive system to go along with that. You've got a new defensive system to go along with that with a bunch of new players. So, those are a lot of moving parts. Those are a lot of moving parts to try to put together against a top 25 team. And so even though it's at home and even though it's Sarkisian, I look at it and saying Louisiana comes in with Billy Napier. First of all, this is his Super Bowl, right? He wins this game and he's on top of the world once again. It turned out an Auburn job last time. He's still going to have more options. They have a veteran squad where they have the majority of guys back from offense and defense. And so Louisiana's advantage is they get to just go out and play. Texas is going to have to think. Texas is not going to be able to always dictate certain things. So with all those moving parts, I think it's an incredibly tough game. Again, you mentioned Iowa State. I mean, this is a good team, the veteran team. So I look at this as a really, really tough game. I think if Texas could have started with Rice and try to build some momentum, that's one thing. But to come out the gate against a really good team, it's going to be an uphill battle.
And what is different about the Sark regime to the Tom Herman regime, at least what you've seen this early part of the year?
I mean, look, I think the easiest thing for anyone to do is win the offseason. And every team wins the offseason. We can go to Kansas offseason stories. We'll hear about how good they're going to be this year and how much more improved they are and the team camaraderie and all those other type of things. So I don't want to overcook, that kind of plot line. I will say this. The buy-in is there from players faster than it was with Tom. I think Tom came in, as many coaches, trying to kick ass and take names, didn't rub the players the right way. And there was a little bit of revolt in year one. Doesn't seem to be like that at all for Sarkisian. I think Sarkisian's NFL background has a lot to do with his approach and how he treats people. Like if you're in the NFL, and I covered the NFL for years, you have to understand that you can't boss around players. That's a player's league, and players will curse you out. And you, as a coach, there's not much you can do. You got to roll with it. So I think he understands. I don't think he's worried about getting cursed out. But what my point is, I think he gave them treat them like pros. They seem to respond really well, with that. He's kind of said little things that I think if you're Texas fans might give you a little bit of hope by playing the best players. The one thing that Tom Herman did a lot in previous years, he would always rotate guys in and out, especially on offense. And Sarkisian is more of I'm going to play my best guys at all times and keep my guys in. So running back like a Bijan Robinson would probably get at least 20 touches in the game, potentially 30 if need be. He's going to rotate. He's going to keep his best, not rotate, but keep his best receivers in at all times. And I think the other thing that, again, from a Texas perspective is when I look at Tom Herman's team last year, they lost by a combined total of all their games last year. The combined total was 13 points. Ended up being a 4.3 average. So Sarkisian doesn't come in having to do a major rebuild, right? It's not like when Tom Herman got here, it took over the Charlie Strong program, a Charlie Strong program that had lost to Kansas, had 2 5-win seasons, that was getting blown out of games and getting embarrassed. It's nothing to that effect. So if Sarkisian could come in and fine-tune some of the little things that maybe that didn't do so well, like I said, playing the best guys at all time, not worrying about the binder, and sometimes just taking the points whenever you have the opportunity to take the points instead of always gambling on fourth down. And if he's as good as everyone says he is, which is the game planning and in-game adjustments, if he fine-tunes a couple of different things, then Texas should have a little bit of hope. You can say, okay, this is going to be different. The challenge is OU is still very good. Iowa State still got everyone to bat. And so there are some challenges within this league, within this conference. But if Sarkisian is the guy that everyone has said he is, then maybe those couple of those little losses where you looked at Texas and, man, you do a couple little things, maybe things can be different. Maybe that ends up being a difference under Sarkisian.
And let's talk a little bit about the quarterback situation. You got Hudson Card getting the start. Obviously, Casey Thompson made some noise there during camp as well. How is this going to play out? Will we see both quarterbacks this weekend? I guess that's the plan, right?
I mean, that's the plan. What I don't understand is what scenario this plan gets executed, right? I mean, do you do this if it's a 7-7 game and do you pull your guy? If it's 14-13, you pull your guy. If you're trailing, do you pull your guy? Like, I don't know what the scenario is that you do that. And then your risk is, let's say you pull him, and let's say Casey Thompson just all of a sudden gets hot. Well, what do you do with Hudson Card? So it's an interesting thing. I don't know if there's a part of me that wonders if it's just coach speak right now, just to make sure that Casey Thompson stays involved. I mean, he's a guy that he's already graduated. He's got 3 years of eligibility left. So, he's a guy that you want to be able to keep in the fold and be able to be here. So maybe that's one way to keep him engaged. But I just don't know how you pull your young quarterback in week one and what that really means. So if Hudson Card won the job, which he did, then that's your guy. That's your guy. I mean, you're not planning to do a ton of rotations at any other key position. So I want to see how that plays out. But Hudson Card went and did what he did. Casey Thompson was, he made his most noise in the Alamo Bowl last year with that great performance, and was pretty much the starting quarterback throughout all of offseason. And over the last couple of weeks, Hudson Card just took over, and they decided that is the ultimately where they want to go. And I've heard nothing but good things about him, his throwing ability, his ability to put it in different spots, the angles that he's able to put it in, and then his mental preparation. So, it'll be, Sarkisian has a good record with quarterbacks, and especially, first year guys. So, you got to also, again, if you have faith in Sarkisian, you got to also believe that if he's throwing Hudson Card out there, it's for a reason.
Last thing for you, Anwar. Talk to me about Bijan Robinson, obviously one of the top running backs in the country. How good is he, and is he a guy we might see as a Heisman candidate at some point?
I would say he's going to emerge into one of the top running backs in the country. Will it happen this year? I don't know, but definitely by next year. But this year, I think ends up being the thing that didn't happen a lot last year, because you're saying Heisman, so I don't want to pigeonhole and put myself because anyone's going to say Anwar predicted that Bijan's going to be a Heisman candidate. And, you're not going to put that on me. But the thing about that's going to happen, that's going to be a little bit different, is that when I talked about that rotation that Tom Herman had, well, this is what he's going to do. Sarkisian's going to ride the hot hand, and that's going to be his running back, and that's going to be the guy that he's going to allow to have 2 yards, 3 yards, 2.5, 4, hoping that at that point 30, then 10, then 40, so he's going to give him the opportunity to get warmed up to wear teams out. Bijan Robinson's a former 5-star running back. He's immensely talented. He's a stud in the making. He is a guy that we will hear a lot about, if not the Heisman, probably at least be in the contention and a conversation for at least a Doak Walker at some point. So, but he's going to be, someone that they lean on and rely on. The only cautionary tale I would say to Texas fans is a few years ago, they had an outstanding running back by the name of Deontay Foreman, who rushed for 2,000 yards in one season. Texas won 5 games that year. So, and I'm not predicting that. I'm using that as a point to understand, as great as Bijan is and as awesome as it is to have a run game that could be spectacular, dynamic. You've seen that. What you have to have, no matter what, you've got to have that quarterback play that accompanies it. And if they have the quarterback play that accompanies it, then everything Bijan Robinson will do will be a plus.
Anwar, we appreciate it, my friend. Thanks so much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Anwar Richardson, orangebloods.com, and that does it for Up to the Second College Football. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch up with you guys next week.